Guys, so I made a statement a couple weeks ago that I need to retract, and I humbly come before you and acknowledge that uh, right here up front in the middle of all of this awesome weather we're having. Here's my statement that I made that I need to retract. I said a couple weeks ago that I wished I was down south, and I don't, so forgive me. I apologize. And I came to this conclusion over the last couple of days as I've realized that God is writing an incredible story that we're in the midst of. Have you guys seen this? Are you paying attention to what's going on? The story he's writing is one of fortitude and strength and perseverance, and we're all learning that lesson together. Aren't you guys excited? No? Some of you? Maybe? I am. I'm absolutely loving this. And it dawned on me that this is what God's doing to us the other day when it was negative 26 degrees or 28 degrees. We did the hot water challenge. Anybody do this? The boiling water challenge? If you didn't get the chance to do it, you need to do it. So the next time it's negative 26 degrees outside, boil some water and go out and throw it up in the air. And it just vaporizes. Like, whew, it's gone. And so it was this phenomenon. A number of people were doing it online, and so we decided as a family to do it. So I bundled up because in 3 minutes you can get frostbite. And so I put everything on. I go outside, and I throw the water in the air, and it goes, whoosh, and it was awesome. It was incredible. And then I realized the extent to which this story is when a friend of ours from California, when my wife posted online, commented on it saying, you know, we're going through a little bit of a chilly spell ourselves. And she said, watching your video makes me think I need to put another layer on because it's currently 61 degrees. And that was when I realized God is writing an incredible story that we can share that many others cannot. And you go from snow to cold to snow to cold to snow to more snow and then some more cold. Fortitude, perseverance, endurance. We are the bold north. Woo! Yes! So I would not want to be in the South right now where it's really nice. You know what? One of the things that snow does is give us a glimpse in the power of God. And we talked about that as we did communion. The fact that Jesus came and died on the cross so that our sins could be washed as white as snow. And there is a sense of awe when you walk outside and you see the landscape completely white and you just stand there. And there's a peace and there's a sense of connection with God that I don't know if you can experience any other place. You can see God standing on the shore, you can see him in the beach, you can see him in the warm weather, but you can't see him the same way because there's multiple aspects of who he is. And his power is exhibited in snow differently than it is in the waves or the wind. And so you need all aspects of that to see who God is. And in our series in Joshua, we're continuing to experience who God is. We're seeing how he interacted with his people so we can understand how does God continue to interact with us today. And one of the things we're going to be seeing in our story today is the power of God. And so we're going to jump right in. Joshua chapter 10. I'm going to ask you guys to open with me. If you don't have a Bible, I'd love to give you one. There's one on the back table. It's blue. It's got the words Holy Bible on it. You can't miss it. Go ahead and pick it up. If you want to download one on your devices, you can do that too. But we open up God's Word every Sunday that we're here with the hope that not just on Sunday, but every day that we pick this up and we hear what it is that God has to say to us communally together on Sunday mornings and individually as he's pushing us forward. And I want to set the stage for the story that we're about to read. This is probably, and I'm going to make a bold statement, this is one of the coolest stories in the Bible. Like, I love this part of Joshua. In fact, this is probably the best part of Joshua so far, and maybe one of the most interesting and intriguing and inviting chapters in the whole book. Maybe in the Bible at large. And so does that set a large enough stage for you? This is an incredible story. And so we're going to begin Joshua chapter 10, verse 1. It says this. Now, Adonai-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, heard that Joshua had taken Ai and totally destroyed it, doing to Ai and its king as he had done to Jericho and its king, and that the people of Gibeon had made a treaty of peace with Israel and become their allies. He and his people were very much alarmed at this because Gibeon was an important city, like one of the royal cities. It was larger than Ai, and all its men were good fighters. So Adonai-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, appealed to all the other kings in the area who have really cool names, which you guys can read on your own later. And he said to them, "Come up and help me attack Gibeon, because it has made peace with Joshua and the Israelites." Then the 5 kings of the Amorites from all those cool towns joined forces. They moved up with all their troops and took up positions against Gibeon and attacked it. And so I want to pause there for a sec to kind of give a little bit of the context of where we're at so we can remember where we've been going to. Israel has come into the promised land, and led by God, they've been moving forward. And now they're on a military campaign. They went into Jericho, and God miraculously knocked all the walls of Jericho down. And they went into Ai, and they experienced a little bit of a hiccup. And then they connected with God again. They experienced victory. And then they were deceived after that victory by a local town pretending to be a faraway nation. And now Joshua has entered into this treaty. The Israelites have entered into a treaty with Gibeon, and the local or the surrounding towns not too far from there have heard what has happened, and they're fearful because of what the Israelites have done. And that sets the stage for this passage. And so I want to kind of show you a little bit of what we're talking about from a geographical perspective. Here's a map. Gilgal, all the way to the right, is the camp of Israel. The Israelites have been hanging out there. In fact, you're going to hear about it here in a second. They've been hanging out there, and they've been using that as home base as they went into Jericho and they went into Ai. Then Gibeon came and made a treaty with them, and once that treaty was found out, these kings in the south heard about it. And so Adonai-Zedek in Jerusalem rallied the kings from the south and said, "We can't allow this to happen. We have to step in. Now that they've joined forces, there are fighting men. This is a royal city. We need to come together and do something about this." And so they commit together to go up. As you see here at the end, they moved up with all their troops and took up positions against Gibeon and attacked it. This is the southern part of the promised land. All the major cities in the south are wrapped up in these kings, in this movement. This is a big deal. Israelites are now, with Jerusalem involved in this, in the fight of their lives. They have not experienced this yet. And so this is a moment where things are going to turn. Go on in verse 6. The Gibeonites then sent word to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal, "Do not abandon your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us. Help us, because all the Amorite kings from the hill country have joined forces against us." So all these kings have come up. They've staked themselves outside of Gibeon. Gibeon sees this, and they send word to Joshua. Well, how do they send word? They didn't have text messages. They didn't have email. They didn't have phones. So chances are they had to send a runner. And so they sent a runner, and if it's 6 miles away, how long would it take for the runner to get there? I don't know, 4-minute mile, right? Everybody can run one of those, 24 minutes-ish. Maybe a little bit longer. Maybe a 5-minute mile. I don't know if they're like me, a 15-minute mile. It's going to take them a while. But they send word, and the word gets there. And so maybe it's an hour, maybe it's 2 hours, maybe it's 20 miles. We don't know the time frame. But the message that's sent is pretty drastic. Do not abandon your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us. Help us. They are against us. The Gibeonites now are desperate. Which, if you hearken back to last week, they come to Israel and they make a treaty with Israel. And I wonder if they were thinking about this was a possibility that was going to happen with the treaty. Were they realizing, did they understand the gravity of the situation, the depth of what was about to take place? That when they enter into this treaty, all of their friends would no longer be their friends. And that all of the cities around them were now going to turn their back on them. And instead of seeing them as allies, now they were enemies. And so not only were they entering into this treaty to save their own lives, but now they were at danger for the individuals around them who they'd at one time communed with, who they were part of the same nation with, was now going to come up against them because they had aligned themselves with Israel. I don't know. It doesn't explain that. What we do know is now Gibeon's in a tough spot. Same time, do you think Joshua understood the gravity of the situation he was entering into? Because what we don't see in the previous chapter is that there was anything related to a treaty being a protective treaty. It was only a peace treaty. That they weren't agreeing to protect them if something happened. They're actually agreeing to allow them to become part of their nation. and that now they are going to become servants, but nowhere in that treaty does it say that when somebody else attacks you, that we will come and fight on your behalf. What Joshua had told them was, we no longer will fight against you, and you will be in peace with us. But does that mean that he would protect them? And so there's an interesting dynamic we see here, that those that once were friends are no longer friends, and those that now are friends are kind of friends in a way that maybe they didn't expect to be friends, which actually kind of gives us a glimpse into what it takes to align yourself with God. So God tells us that when we come to him, we have to be willing to leave everything behind, forsake all other things to align ourselves with who he is. And we see a real life example right here that they were walking away from everything they had known to align themselves with God. And so what does Joshua do in this situation? How is he supposed to handle it? Is he going to go fight on their behalf? Is he going to hopefully do the thing we talked about last week? Inquire of God. This is kind of a big deal. Hopefully he lays it before the Lord and says, what do I do? So what does he do? It tells us in verse 7, so Joshua marched up from Gilgal with his entire army, including all the best fighting men. The Lord said to Joshua, do not be afraid of them. I have given them into your hand. Not one of them will be able to withstand you. Whew. God's in the middle of it. Which hopefully was a major lesson that they learned prior to this, because there have been a couple situations where they had done things where they hadn't said, okay, God, should we do this? And now it kind of hints that almost they start without him, and yet then it says, nope, God's right there in the middle of it. So Joshua marches up. Why? Why does he go? If you were to think from a human perspective as to why he shouldn't go and help them, there are way more positives to that than why he should. He starts the march to go help them in a way that you're sitting there going, but actually this could kind of be an answer to your problem. If they get attacked, if Gibeon gets wiped out, you no longer have to honor the treaty that was made when you made a mistake by venturing into something without inquiring of God about. So why don't you just let them be, leave them to their own, have them fight their own battle, and yet that's not what happens here. Why? Well, they had made a promise. As we talked about last week, when you make a mistake, what's the most important part of making a mistake? How you respond and react to that mistake. And so maybe it wasn't a protective treaty, maybe it was just a peace treaty. And yet Joshua sits there going, no, now these individuals are part of us. And we have to take that serious. And so therefore, we will go and fight on their behalf. And God says, go, I will be with you. Second part of it, though, is there's a strategic nature here. In fact, this is what's incredible about the story. As you read through Joshua, God has a plan, and he puts it all together, and he uses the situations that you sit there going, how could you use that? What's key here is that all the nations from the south, or all the cities from the south, are now coming up and doing what? They're coming together and putting themselves in a place where God is using what had happened with Gibeon to say, now I'm providing the doorway. I'm opening up the avenue for you to have to probably use less resources to go fight this whole southern part of the nation in one spot that I'm bringing them to. Whoo, that's pretty cool. So wait, God, you made a mistake, or Israelites made a mistake that God, you're using for your plan so that you're actually making it easier on your people because you're bringing everybody to this central location for your purposes to live out what you want to happen? Wow. As you read through Joshua, as you see this story, as you see how God works, he uses everything and puts all the pieces together exactly the way that he wants to. Verse 9, after an all-night march from Gilgal, Joshua took them by surprise. This is a pretty important part of this passage. So Joshua marches, takes all of his people, God's in the middle of it, and he does it by night, which was fairly unique. See, you don't want to move at night. Why don't you want to move at night? Well, it actually puts you in a very vulnerable situation. If you move your troops at night, you can't see what's going on around you. Remember, this was a dark world they lived in. There's no streetlights. Right? There's no big vehicles with giant spotlights showing you the way. They're probably marching at the very least by candle, maybe by torch. And if you're carrying torches, you can only move at a certain speed because it will go out unless you have some protective measure. And I haven't seen one of those from that time period, so I'm not sure it existed, but I'm just thinking maybe they had one. But they had to march at night. They're vulnerable. They could have been attacked, and yet God said, I am with you, so there's a boldness that's there. But if you're marching at night too, there's a speed with which you have to march, which isn't the same speed as to which you could do it during the day, because you haven't been paying attention to what's going on, and so it's much slower. So they're not moving at 4 miles a minute, or 4 minutes a mile. There you go. They're not moving at that speed. They're moving a lot slower. So it wasn't typical. It was at night. They're moving forward into a situation that God has for them, and yet he even uses this. Why? Because what it says in verse 10, the Lord threw the enemy, threw them into confusion before Israel. So Joshua and the Israelites defeated them completely at Gibeon. Israel pursued them along the road, going up to Beth Horon, and cut them down all the way to Azekah and Makkedah. As they fled before Israel on the road down from Beth Horon to Azekah, the Lord hurled large hailstones down on them. And more of them died from hail than were killed by the swords of the Israelites. On the day the Lord gave the Amorites over to Israel, Joshua said to the Lord in the presence of Israel, Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and you, moon, over the valley of Ajalon. So the sun stood still and the moon stopped till the nation avenged itself on its enemies, as it is written in the book of Jashar. The sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day. There has never been a day like it before or since, a day when the Lord listened to a human being. Surely the Lord was fighting for Israel. Then Joshua returned with all Israel to the camp at Gilgal. So what could have been a huge mess, what God used to create what he did, was something that each one of us, if we'd looked at that situation, we would have said, there's no way. Joshua makes a mistake. All these kings show up. They're going to fight Gibeon. God then says, go at night. And yet what he does is he turns what could have been an awful situation into one of the most epic battles probably in the history of the world. That's a fairly bold statement. You're right, it is. Because as you read through this, have you ever heard a battle that unfolded like this one before? Probably not. And there are many elements within it that I want to look at, but the first one is this. The author's trying to get us to understand something through this epic story. And what is it that he's encouraging us to know? First thing is that God fights for his people. The theme through this passage, the theme through this series has been that God has a plan, that he knows what's going on. What the author wants us to see here is that God fights for his people, and not always in the way that we would expect. He does it at night. He does it with hailstones. He makes the sun stand still. And yet the author uses these miraculous things to highlight again and again and again that God fights for his people, and he provides the victory. The individuals in the immediate vicinity of where they were fighting were all wiped out. And then those that weren't right there in the immediate vicinity realized what was going on and they fled. And as they're fleeing, the author shows us that not only did he empower his people, but he himself personally stepped in to make sure that this victory would be won. That God himself got involved. And so how did God get involved in this passage? Well, a number of different ways. First one is through these things called hailstones. So as the victory is unfolding, as Israel is winning, those on the backside hear about it and they start fleeing. And so where did they go? Well, they fled the only way they could have. As I said, God brought all these individuals together. He brought them into what they believed was this plain. There was one way in on one side, one way in on the other side, and this battle unfolds in this plain. And as Israel's winning the victory, the enemy decides that we're outnumbered, we're losing, we have to go, so they start fleeing out the backside. Well, the only way to get out was this road that's mentioned in this passage, and that road happened to be a pass. There was only one way to go, which God in his wisdom understood, brought individuals through one way, sent them out one way. And so Israel's kind of handcuffed at this point because if they were to flee after them, they'd only be able to get their backside. So God knows this, and he steps in and he throws these hailstones down. In fact, the passage says more people die from the hailstones than they actually did from the swords in the fight, as the author is telling us God is fighting for his people. Why? Two reasons. He made a promise, and he also said that he was going to avenge the sin of the Amorites. And God was doing that in a mighty way here through hailstones. What type of hailstones was he using? Which is fascinating because when you think about God using hailstones to win a battle, what immediately comes to mind? Well, we only have a small context of what hail looks like, right? We know what hail is. How many people have seen golf ball size hail? Anybody? A few of you? How many baseball size hail? One of you? Two of you? Three of you? How many like cantaloupe size hail? See, our context doesn't understand that. Once we get past a certain size of hail, we don't realize, and even then, the extent to which hail can do damage, sometimes they're going, hail could kill somebody? I mean, yeah, it can be dangerous. It's dented a car before, maybe broke a window, but can it take somebody out? Well, even our simple context, the answer to that question is yes, it could. In fact, thank you to Guinness World Records, they know everything. You know what the largest hailstone found ever in the world is by weight? 2.25 pounds. In April 14th of 1986, a hailstone was discovered that was 2.25 pounds. To put that in perspective, what's 2.25 pounds? It's like a laundry detergent bottle falling out of the sky. Or it's like a iron, right? A steam iron falling out of the sky, which any of you have seen the movie Home Alone? It's immediately when I was thinking about this. When he pulls on the light and Marv gets slammed in the face with the steam iron, I don't think that would feel good. Now picture something like that falling out of the sky and landing on you. Or the largest in diameter was 7.9 inches in Vivian, South Dakota on July 23rd, 2010. Largest hail ball circumference, 18.74 inches around in Aurora, Nebraska on June 22nd, 2003. So as I was reading this, I was like, great, yeah, I can visualize that. But I wanted to show you a video of a little bit more extensively what type of damage hail could do. Take a look at this. Anybody want to be in that pool right now?
I know, isn't it something? Big. Hey, that'll kill you. That hit you. Because it's going to hit him in the head and probably hurt him if he gets hit. Hey, there's a deer.
Oh my.
I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want to be swimming in that pool. I think that could cause a little bit of damage, and that guy got it just right. It could kill you. And the deer understood as it took off for its life. Like, woo! But was it actual hailstones like we understand it? The answer is probably not. It probably wasn't that type of hail. In fact, the word that's used there is used multiple times throughout Scripture to refer to actual rocks. And so what if rocks fell from the sky? How about a rock like this? About the size of a hailstone on that video. What if I were to take this and just throw it into the audience? Anybody want to play catch? Probably not, right? Chucking this up in the air, just up to the ceiling and letting it drop could do a little bit of damage. But not just this rock. What about something like this? It's a man-made rock, right? It's not necessarily a natural rock, but many of you have held one of these and understood the weight of one of these. And so what if this fell from the sky? Or how about if I just walked up to the balcony and tossed it over? Anybody want to try to catch it? One of you, my daughter. Thought I trained her better than that. Well, even something like that is probably not indicative of the size of hail that fell from the sky, because the word that's used here to describe the hailstones is the same word that we'll talk about next week that's used later in the chapter to talk about a stone large enough to cover the opening of a cave. And so more likely, it probably looked like this picture. potentially a rock that size fell from the sky. The author is trying to tell us something. God is powerful. He fights for his people because he made a promise that he would give the Israelites the promised land. And he also made a promise that he would wipe out the sin of the Amorites, that the sin of the Canaanites had come to fruition. And so he needed to act. And now was the perfect time to act. But not only does he drop stones from the sky, but there's another part of this passage which is really intriguing, which shows us the power of God. And that's this idea that the sun stood still. It says this in verse 12, on the day the Lord gave over the Amorites to Israel, Joshua said to the Lord in the presence of Israel, sun, stand still over Gibeon, and you, moon, over the valley of Ajalon. So the sun stood still and the moon stopped till the nation avenged itself on its enemies. So rocks are falling out of the sky, and God gives us this sign with the sun standing still as Joshua petitions, which shows us that God will fight for us, that he will intercede on our behalf. And so as he tells Joshua, do not be afraid, this was another symbol that he was giving to Joshua, that you do not need to be afraid because I will be with you and I will fight for you. So as we sit here today, or we stand here today, do we still have that same promise? Do we have the promise that God gave to Joshua, do not be afraid? Can we believe that God will fight on our behalf? And the answer is yes, we can. See, Jesus came, who was God himself, to this earth and said very similar statements to individuals at that time. And then he told those individuals, called the disciples, to go and tell the whole world about who I am, because I will make the same promises. I will fulfill what God has done, and I will continue it on. And in John 14:27, he very specifically says to us, peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. He was talking about a time where he was going to be gone and he was going to leave his helper to be here to do the things that he had done, to do the things that God had done prior to that, to continue that through to today, whereas we stand in whatever situation we're in right now, we can know that we do not have to be afraid because Jesus is with us. That he has given us his helper to go forward in this life, that when we encounter battles, when we struggle with trials, when we go through situations, that we have a God who dropped hailstones from the sky and made the sun stand still on our side. That we are a part of what God is still doing in miraculous ways like that. So did the sun actually stand still? For years, theologians and scientists have argued, did the sun stand still? And many people have commented on the fact that it would be absolutely impossible for that to happen. Now, there's no way the sun could have stood still. Why? Because the implications are drastic. What would have happened if the sun had actually stood still? Well, as we know today, the sun wouldn't have stood still. He was just, the author was writing what it was that he perceived. So what would have had to have taken place is that the earth would have actually stopped spinning. Now, for the sun to stand still in the sky, the earth would have to come to a complete halt. And scientists have argued that that would not be possible. Why? Well, there's way too many variables, way too many factors. Because what if the earth stopped? Does anybody know how fast our earth is traveling right now as we spin? We're traveling something like 67,000 miles an hour as we rotate around the sun. But as we spin, we're spinning at a speed of about 1,000 miles per hour, which gives us our 24-hour day. So this earth that we're on is spinning at 1,000 miles per hour. For the earth to come to a halt would be catastrophic. One of the things that scientists have asked is, so if the earth stopped spinning, would the atmosphere have stopped spinning? Which we don't know. Doesn't give us that. So let's hypothesize that it didn't. So if only the earth came to a standstill, but the atmosphere around us did not, what would happen? It would be like you doing 70 miles an hour in a car and slamming on your brakes and coming to zero immediately. Time that by like 45 times. Everything that was not set or bolted down, everything on earth that was not in the bedrock of this planet that we're on, would have gone flying off the face of the earth. Gone, disappeared, completely obliterated if the earth had stopped and the atmosphere had not. Okay, so what if the atmosphere did stop with the earth? Well, then there's the heat of the sun. They've hypothesized that within a short period of time, if the earth stopped spinning and you were directly in the sunlight, that things would start scorching almost immediately. And that within a short period of time, everything would burn up, including the human beings standing on the face of the earth. But the thing that I found most fascinating is that the spherical nature of this globe that we stand on right now is because of the fact that we're spinning. That much of the shape of the earth is due to the fact that we're moving at the rate of speed that we are. And so if the earth were to stop, the center of the earth would start moving in. And we'd no longer be a perfect sphere. In fact, the equator would start flattening out, which means then that the oceans would be released of their borders because the lines that we currently have would no longer exist. You know how long it would take for massive flooding to start all over the world? 42 seconds. 42 seconds. If this earth stopped spinning within 42 seconds, it would start flooding. So did God stop the earth from spinning so the sun would stand still? Maybe. Is it possible? It totally is. In fact, in Psalm 115:3, it says, "Our God is in heaven, and he does whatever he pleases." So maybe God stopped the earth and the atmosphere and turned down the heat of the sun and kept the globe perfectly spherical. Could have happened. Is there another option? There's so many hypotheses out there, I can't get into all of them. Maybe it was an eclipse. Maybe they're actually talking about darkness. Maybe. There's a number of different maybes. If you want to spend hours researching this, like I did this week, Google it. It will be there for you. But there's an interesting third possibility to this that I want to bring up. And that's the nature of the writing that's being used in this passage. In fact, if you're using a translation right now, the chances are that in your translation, the indentation of those two verses has changed. If you look at the words that are used in verses 12 and 13, the way that it's written has become different. Why? Because the writing style shifts. It goes from being a narrative to being poetic. It goes from telling the story of what actually happened to using words that may be describing what took place that day. And so I want to read a theory for you out of the New American Commentary that says this. If these words are poetic and figurative, the words in 12 and 13 do not describe a literal astronomical or geophysical phenomenon. They do, however, tie in with the prose account of the day's events by means of a few keyword or associative connections. In the first instance, the words about the sun stopping, standing still, and not hurrying to go down simply describe the entire day's battle, which ended when the sun did go down. The key words here are sun and go, found in both the prose and poetic parts of the passage. Perhaps the day's events simply seemed especially long. The words about the moon stopping and standing still are linked with the all-night march. Here, there are no keyword links, but the connections between the moon and such a march are obvious. The second set of poetic lines reiterates what was said in the first set, adding the words about the sun's not hurrying to go down, which reinforces the picture of the sun obeying God's words. What do the words addressed to the sun and moon mean then, if not the earth stopped rotating or shining or something similar? Simply this, that God was directing the sun and the moon to fight for Israel in the same way that the stars fought for Israel in Deborah's day, Judges 5:20, or else that they were to stand amazed as he fought for Israel, just as they did in Habakkuk 3:11. We do not imagine that these statements in Judges and Habakkuk mean anything except that God's victory is total and his majesty is awe-inspiring. Do we properly read these statements as involving universe-altering astronomical or geophysical phenomena? The issue is the same in Joshua 10:12-13. The suggestion offered here is that the language is similar to the psalmist who urges the rivers to clap their hands and the mountains to sing for joy in Psalm 98:8, or the trees of the field to sing for joy in Psalm 96:12. Or when Isaiah writes, the mountains and the hills will burst into song before you, and all the trees of the field will clap their hands, Isaiah 55:12. So did the sun stand still? Did God order all of this to happen? We'll probably never know. Should we argue about it? Should we think too deeply about it? Probably not. Why? Because what's incredible, all the stuff that I've just described to you doesn't really mean anything. Other than the fact that the author is trying to tell us that God is powerful and incredible and amazing, and he's painting a picture because there's actually a more powerful and incredible, amazing moment in this, other than rocks falling from the sky and the sun standing still. And this is where the author leads us, verse 14. There has never been a day like it before. Why? Because of all these miracles? No, because of this. There's never been a day like it before or since. A day when the Lord listened to a human being. Surely the Lord was fighting for Israel. I love this passage. You can read about all those things. We can go through the science of all of it. We can be in awe of rocks falling from the sky and the sun standing still. And yet the author says it's the most incredible day in the world. Nothing has been better before or after. Why? Because God listened to a human being. Because God heard Joshua's petition, because God said, I will step in on behalf of my people and I will do something when you call out to me. Well, guess what? The same God that listened then is the same God that listens now. And the God of Joshua is the God that we serve today, who can drop rocks from the sky, who can stop the sun from moving in the sky, who can do all sorts of things. But the most incredible thing about the God that we serve is that he listens. In fact, not only was it so incredible to the author there that he uses a word that not only did he listen, but he obeyed. That God did what it was that Joshua asked of him, that God fought on behalf of Israel, that God was a personal God, that this individual is sitting there going, no way. God listens to his people. Which is the main point the author wants us to get out of this, which is then something that you and I can ask today as we stand here. Does God still do that? Does God still listen to his people? Well, that's actually one of the main themes all the way throughout the Bible. That God is a personal God who cares about his people, who listens to him when they call. 1 John 5:14. This is the confidence that we have in approaching God, that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. That the God that can drop hailstones from the sky and stop the sun in its tracks listens to us. And that when we call, he knows. And that when we petition him, he'll do something about it. But there's an order here that I want to make very clear. Specifically in 1 John 5:14, that when we ask according to his will, he listens. Joshua 1-9 was Joshua listening to God, that Joshua understood God's will. That Joshua went into this battle knowing, God, you promised us this land, and you're going to avenge the sin of the Amorites. I know what your will is, and so on behalf of you, I appeal to make this happen. And God said, I'm in. And so we today need to understand that if God's going to listen to us, there's an order. Are we listening to him first? Are we understanding his will? Are we where he wants us to be? Because when we're in community with him, when we're pursuing him, and we understand what it is that he wants for us, when we petition him, he listens. And so what will he do when we call out? Well, there's no limit to what he will do. There's absolutely zero limit to what will happen when God's people, on behalf of him, call out to him in prayer. Petition him, scream to him, cry out, God, will you do this for me? He might drop hailstones out of the sky. Probably not, because we're going to get into that in a couple weeks. He acts differently a little bit than he did then. But who knows? I don't know. Maybe you need insurance for your car. God, I need hail. Man. Maybe he'll stop the sun. Or maybe he'll listen to the cries of his people who are languishing in their sin, who need a savior, and he'll send Jesus to this earth, and he'll go to the cross, and he'll take the hail-throwing judgment that we deserved. See, there isn't anything that God won't do. There is no limit to what he'll do when we cry out to him. So do we cry out enough? And I would say the answer is no. We do not. And we need to. We need to be a people on our knees crying out to a powerful God who will change things if we ask according to his will. So are we a people on our knees? Are we a people understanding God's will, saying, God, bring change to our world today. Stop the sun. Well, we need it. And so here's my challenge to each and every one of us this week. Take these words to heart. petition God, be a people of prayer, be a people on your knees, be a people crying out, because we live in a world that so desperately needs it today, needs a group of people that are going to understand that when we petition God, he will listen. So what are we praying for, God? We're praying that you will bring revival, that you will bring change, that you will radically wipe this world white as snow. And God, start here first. That you will change me first, that you will radically transform me, that you will rock my world, pun intended. Ha! Man, you guys are a tough crowd today, huh? That you will rock my world. That you will throw stones at me, that you will stop the sun and I will stand in awe of you. And that when I cry out, you will change the world. So my challenge today as we leave, let's be that people. And believe this story, that God is a powerful, miraculous God who listens to his people. So lay it before him and see what he does. You never know. He may just stop the sun. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you. We thank you so much for who you are, that you are a God that knows us and loves us and cares for us and listens to us. That you are a God that hears our cry, and that when we listen to you, when we are in your will, when we petition you,